Hello, my name is Sean Henry. I'm half Irish and half English, and I'm going to talk to you about my work. I took my first steps towards making sculpture in the very early 1980s when I did pottery at school, and then after some angst and worry, I decided to go to do a foundation course at art school, and then from there I studied ceramics for 3 years in Bristol. Because of my background in ceramics, I got very drawn to working with clay, and I think I've actually used the same clay for nearly 40 years. But it's gone in lots of different directions. I use steel, I use plaster, bronze, oil paint, external paint. But the beginning is clay, and then the bronze and the plaster is really so that I can make copies. I can make different versions of the same piece. But clay is where my heart is, for sure. So the studio is a second home, and there are good and bad aspects of working from home. So I'll come over here to get something, and then I'll end up being in the studio much longer than I expected. But the studio is a kind of private space in a way, I suppose. It's where the ideas are and where a lot of the work's kept. It's funny, people do ask me how long they take, and you want to say, well, 25 years to learn how to do it and then 2 weeks to make it. So I'm not really sure whether how long it's not that important, I suppose, and it is a slow process. Some work comes very fast, other pieces are much harder to get to the end of, and I, in a practical way, they're clay, then it either is fired in the kiln or moulded. Normally the bigger pieces I'll have a mould maker come to the studio, and then there's a long process of wax, more mould making, casting it in sections in bronze, welding it together, working out the support structure within the piece. So it can be up to a year. To a very big piece might take me that long, while doing other work in parallel with it. There isn't an easy, I can't give an easy message to what the work's about. I think art is essentially a non-verbal communication, so for me to try to explain my own reasons for making something isn't necessarily helpful for the viewer. You know, the work, it's an extension of me and my beginnings, I suppose. You know, it starts in the studio, but ultimately, whether the pieces are in the gallery or the public realm, you know, I'm not going to stand next to it explaining it to someone. You know, somebody might come across a sculpture going to work and quite rightly, you know, ignore it for the first 2 or 3 times, and maybe the 4th time they go past, they'll think, well, who is that, or what is that? And that's a responsibility as well, you know, and I care deeply about how they're shown, where they're shown, and it's why actually I avoid making anything exactly life-size, because we have a gut reaction to sculpture that mimics life, because it's actually quite uncomfortable. So my pieces are always either smaller or larger, so there's room. funny thing about making figures is that I think it taps into this ability we have to read the human form. We notice clothing and body language, a look in the eye, and I think we generally make judgments and decisions about people very rapidly. So with this in mind, when I make my pieces, I try as hard as I can to keep the identity of the individual anonymous, and to then try to engage with what I call the psychology of scale by making the sculptures deliberately either smaller or larger than life. I don't have a set meaning as to who the figures are or what they might be doing, but there is always a hidden narrative that will be affected by the time of day, the weather, the seasons, and of course what's in the mind of the viewer when they happen to come across the sculpture. Having said that, obviously I have my own motivations for making them, and most are based on real people or a combination of real people that I've met and spent time with and then photographed. Occasionally they'll sit for me too. On a personal level, I'm drawn to people who are emotionally present and who, either consciously or unconsciously, are prepared to reveal elements of their inner life and perhaps even their true selves. As I say, drawn to specific individuals, and it's not so much because of who they are, it's to do with how they are. I think a lot of people quite rightly don't want you to know what they're thinking or feeling, and so, for instance, I don't work with professional models because they're too good at hiding what they're feeling, and that would be a struggle for me to sculpt a model, because I'm really interested in the internal life of the people that I depict or try to depict. Every now and then you'll come across somebody who through their body language or through something about them reveals more, I think, of their inner selves, and those are the people that I like to work with. I think themes develop slowly, and my figures, while it's important to say, while they're nearly all based on individuals, or maybe two or three individuals I might combine in one figure, essentially they're anonymous, and I flag that with the titles, so they're called things like seated man, standing man, walking woman. And the reason there is to sort of keep the specificity of the work kind of open. I'm not excited in telling one story. I want to try and tell multiple stories if I can. So I think sculptures, when they are successful, enable the viewer to look at the world around them differently and to consider the space we inhabit and our identity within it. I'm interested in ideas around identity, about how we perceive each other and ourselves in relationship to others. Important to recognize that the objects are made from clay or bronze and paint. I'm certainly not trying to copy life, a completely impossible task. And if you look closely, you can see clear evidence that the figures are man-made. The thing about sculpture is it occupies space in the same way that we do. It's part of our world. And so I think the location is key, as the location and the orientation, really down to the last millimetre, have a significant impact on how we see them. Putting art in the public realm is especially effective and something I enjoy a lot. The work crosses the threshold of the studio or the gallery and enters what we think of as the real world, where its effect is measured in different ways. People obviously can choose to ignore it, but later they might engage with it on their own terms. People react in all sorts of different ways to the work, actually, and it's not, while I care a lot about how the pieces are shown, I have obviously no control over how people react to them. And I think, a good example is when I showed some of my work at Salisbury Cathedral. The age of the viewer and the reason, so tourists would come and maybe, I had a figure of a sleeping man outside the cathedral, and kids would sit on the bed and have a cigarette and thought it was very cool, and then somebody who was much older was quite offended by it, and I think perhaps because of the context of the church, maybe she'd just come out of a funeral, maybe she just really reacted against the work in a way that was quite surprising, and it just made me realise that actually with all art we bring a lot of ourselves to it. Whether it's Rembrandt or Turner, your experience as the viewer is equally important to whatever the artist had in his mind. And I think that's why art can be very effective, because it communicates in a sort of conscious. I think then there's quite a sort of theatricality to the installation. You get a variety of different pieces in different places that slowly kind of embed themselves in the town. So yeah, I feel very lucky. Also in Norway, I've worked a bit in Norway, and also in Pietrasanta in Italy. And I think it reinforces the universality of the figures in a way that they can handle these changes of locations, and I like that. I mean, I think that's exciting as an artist, to feel that the work continues to do something without me being present as the artist. That's what it's about, really, is trying to make something that lasts longer than we do, and I hope I've done that.